Hello and welcome to a brand new video. Today we're finishing our 5-part series on Plato's dialogues with Phaedo. If you haven't already, I would highly recommend watching the previous videos on Euthyphro, Apology, and Crito for proper context leading up to the death of Socrates. But in short, in Euthyphro, Socrates discussed before his trial whether something is good because it's chosen by the gods, or is it chosen by the gods because it's good, and we discuss possible answers to this. In Apology, we go through Socrates' defense during the trials for the charges of impiety and corrupting the youth and the sentencing of death. In Crito, we discuss Socrates' reasoning for not escaping jail and whether his actions were in line with his philosophy or not. I also made a video on Meno, how you want to pronounce it, as it is included in this book, but it takes place way before his trial. With that being said, let's begin. The main purpose of this dialogue is to discuss the nature of the soul, more specifically, whether it is immortal or not. Socrates said that true knowledge is not accessible through the senses, but through reason, and the body distracts the soul via pleasure, pain, and the senses, and thus making philosophy and death a means of purification. So the goal of philosophy is to separate the soul from the body and to reach these eternal truths. Therefore, death is not to be feared, as it liberates the soul to its natural state. So it was asked to Socrates whether the soul is immortal or not, so he presents 4 arguments to suggest that it is. The first argument was the cyclical or opposites argument. Basically, it states that all things come from opposites, sleep from wakefulness, life from death, and vice versa. Therefore, the living must come from the dead, implying that the soul must exist before birth and after death. Otherwise, all life would eventually end with no return. But I don't know if this works for every example, though. Does short come from tall? The second argument comes from his dialogue with Meno, the theory of recollection. I highly recommend watching that video for more context and discussions regarding this theory. It states that the soul is immortal and has already learned everything in past lives, and therefore, learning is just remembering. So to prove this, he uses a slave boy and guides the kid to learn geometry. At first he doesn't understand it, but he eventually gets it right, and Socrates states that the initial guesses by the kid are flickers of forgotten knowledge, but not knowledge yet, but it's a sign that the soul is recollecting truths it already knew. Or on the other hand, he simply just taught the kid geometry. The brain has potential to reason and learn over time through the environment and experience. The third argument Socrates presents is the affinity argument. The soul resembles what is invisible, immortal, and divine, unlike the body, which is visible, perishable, and mortal. After death, the body decays, but the soul, being of a different nature, persists. One could argue that just because something resembles something, it doesn't mean it shares all its properties, so that's one objection you could say to Socrates' argument. Like, for example, a shadow resembles a person, but isn't a person. And Socrates further states that virtuous souls live purely and philosophically, so they remain in a divine realm, while impure souls attached to body pleasures are reincarnated or punished by being bound to corporeal life. So some other objections, in addition to ones I made, were made against Socrates' arguments so far. For example, the soul may be like the harmony produced by the instrument lyre. If the lyre is destroyed, then the harmony vanishes, so if the body dies, perhaps the soul dies too. Or the example of a weaver who outlives many cloaks. Eventually, though, the weaver too perishes. So even if the soul survives many deaths, it could weaken over time and perish eventually. So even though that's the case, the immortality of the soul still is unproven. So this is where Socrates presents his fourth and final argument for his death. The forms like beauty, goodness, and equality are internal and unchanging. The soul brings to life the body, and thus it always participates in the form of life. The soul, therefore, cannot admit its opposite, death. What does not admit death is immortal. Therefore, by nature, the soul is immortal and cannot be destroyed. And if you want to learn more about the forms, I would highly recommend watching my video on the Republic by Plato. It seems like in Phaedo, the soul isn't a form, but it's kind of like a form, as it's in the same realm. The soul is the true self, it's the source of rationality and virtue, and it has its own desires through the forms, and these desires are transferred directly to the body. In the Republic, Plato introduces the soul as tripartite, with it having a reason, spirit, and appetite, so he needs some more time to develop his theory. And after these arguments, Socrates bids farewell and drinks the hemlock. Perhaps he believed that the soul was immortal to comfort him before death. We may never know. Okay, let's now explore how later thinkers responded to and developed Plato's ideas. Aristotle famously refuted the idea of forms in his metaphysics. So first, there are seemingly no limits to the amount of possible forms, such that it seems implausible and complicated to be a theory that provides a good metaphysical explanation of the world. Secondly, there's no way of knowing whether the material objects in the form are correlated. There must be a third man to tell us, but this thing can neither be a form or material. And how do we know the relationship between the third man and the form and the material object? There must be a fourth man, and then a fifth man. This can go on ad infinitum. Thirdly, things could participate in multiple forms at the same time, which can lead to problems. Fourthly, it is unclear how the forms are a cause of material things. Fifthly, it is not pragmatic. A shoemaker doesn't look to a pattern or form of a shoe to make his shoe, so we don't really use them in our everyday lives. Sixthly, something can be like something without being derived from it. Seventhly, how can the substances or forms and the things that which is material is be isolated from each other? So how can they be separate from each other, but they still relate? Okay, so rather Aristotle believed that the essences or the universal is the thing in itself. So that's why you see in the school of Athens, you see Plato pointing up, and then Aristotle going like this. He's pointing to the earth. He's saying that the universals are in the object themselves, where Plato says that the universals are in the realm of forms. And so this is why he says that the soul is the form of the body, and this is his theory of hylomorphism. But all that being said, Aristotle says perhaps one part of the soul may be immortal. So Aristotle introduces the passive intellect, and for example, it's like wax receiving a seal. It takes in impressions from experience, and he also introduces the active or agent intellect, like light making potential visible. It actualizes knowledge. This agent intellect is separable, impassible, unmixed, and it acts like God. It doesn't depend on the body and is therefore immaterial and immortal. According to Ibn Rushd, also known as the commentator for his contributions to analysis of Aristotelian philosophy, the agent intellect is a universal shared by all humans, a single divine intellect that individuals plug into. Our individual souls aren't immortal, but this universal intellect is. Ibn Sina, on the other hand, said that every part of the soul is immortal. And as for someone who's more traditional in the Islamic tradition, Ibn Taymiyya states that the soul is created and originated by God. Had the soul not been created, then it would not have acknowledged God's lordship over it. And after death, people meet some kind of reward or punishment that they experience in the soul as well as the body, and that the soul, after it has been placed separate from the body, continues to live and experiences pleasure or pain. And when the day of judgment comes, the soul will be returned to their bodies, and the people will be raised from their graves to face their Lord. According to Thomas Aquinas, he Christianizes Aristotle by claiming that each human has their own immortal rational soul, including their own active intellect, and further expands on this idea to say that it's tripartite. This shares some similarities with the Platonic idea of a tripartite soul. Within it are distinctively present a nutritive, a sensitive, and an intellectual soul. The latter is created by God and is solely taken by human beings. The other two types of souls, and those are the parts that make the soul corruptible. But also Aristotle has a tripartite soul in his metaphysics, or his idea of humanity. And Aquinas also says that the soul is directly created by God. And he does agree with Aristotle that the soul is the first actuality of the natural body that has life potentially. Continuing with the Christian tradition, Gregory of Nyssa stands as more in line with the Platonists rather than the Aristotelian notion of the soul, but he still keeps it Christian. Gregory says that the soul is created by God, alive, and intelligent, and it gives life to the body while also being immaterial. While Plato says that the body is a prison for the soul, Gregory agrees insofar that someone can get too attached to their body, but he also gives the body more respect. But he also he rejects reincarnation. Well, reincarnation is something seen in the Republic with the myth of air. But he both see death as an opportunity for the soul to be purified from its attachments to the flesh. But Gregory interprets this as a way of theosis. But I say he's more in line with the Platonists for the reason that he reads more like a dualist than believing in hylomorphism. And that brings us to the end of this video, and hopefully that made sense to you. And if not, please leave a comment below and I'll try to answer it to the best of my abilities. And also let me know which idea of the soul do you most agree with, or whether that you disagree or agree with Socrates' ideas, or if you have any possible rebuttals to many objections I've raised against him. And as always, don't forget to like and subscribe as always.